All right, good morning, and welcome to Bible class. So I had a handout on the chair in the back, if you didn't get it. And part of the reason I'm using the mic is I'm testing out if I could just live stream this instead of having to pre-record it, and see if that'll, give me an hour out of my week but we'll see. So this is kind of just a test run for that. But all right, so our topic for this semester looks like will be hope for the future, messianic prophecies in Isaiah. So someone had suggested it, and I thought it was good, and then turned out while looking for resources, I emailed one of my seminary profs saying, hey, you taught Isaiah, do you have a nice list of these? And he goes, well, here's the book I'm working on. So today's kind of just more a general introduction to Isaiah, and then we'll dive deeper into a lot of this as we go through the book, because of course there's lots of messianic prophecies in Isaiah. There's lots of prophecies in Isaiah in general. And so we can divide up Isaiah in a couple different ways, but the bulk of it just depends on whether you divide the last half into one or two parts. So first, one way to look at it, first part's condemnation. So, and then the second half is consolation. So the first half is all the warnings that bad things are going to happen because you're not following God's commands. The second half is all you didn't follow God's commands and you're in exile, how can you still have hope? Is one way to look at it. Or if we look at it this way, so first 39 chapters or so are warnings, shape up or bad things will happen to you. 40 to 55 is hope in exile. The bad things are happening to you because you didn't listen. And then 56 to 66, the return from exile. God was faithful to his promises and brought you back to the promised land, even though you messed up. So let's try and not mess up again. And some other stuff. And we'll get through that as we go through. But of course the the challenge is, because of those three vastly different topics, different themes, different presentations, that then people think there might be three different Isaiahs writing this, because they're so vastly different. And especially as we'll touch on in a little bit, there's some stuff in Isaiah that looks to the future in ways that, if you don't believe in supernatural inspiration of Scripture, are not going to make sense. So they have to. So to understand it historically, if you don't believe that part, then there's things in here that you're not going to get, or that you're going to have problems with trying to get. So then you get, and of course you got to use fancy Greek words for all these things. Proto-Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, or Trito-Isaiah, so first, second, or third Isaiah, essentially. All right, but we trust there's just one Isaiah. That's been the consensus until the scholars started taking everything apart, trying to get things down to their itty-bitty things. And now the movement, and one of the movements in biblical scholarship, is to just take things as we are. That they're trying to figure out how all these little pieces got put back together. Why first, second, and third Isaiah got put together in one book. That's not an interesting question anymore. How we look at this thing that has been put together, that's the interesting question. How do we understand why it's put together, why it works the way it is? Which conservative scholars can work better with that than other things too. But of course you can see Isaiah there in the stained glass window, which marks him as kind of an important guy, right? So there's Isaiah. Isaiah is right above Moses on the right-hand side there, left-hand facing. As the kind of two big guys in the Old Testament, and then, of course, Peter and Paul on the other side representing the New Testament. But Isaiah is a big, important prophet for a variety of reasons, partly because his book is so long, it's 66 chapters, and also partly because he's active in ministry so long. From 740 to 680 BC is what we understand his ministry being active at, and there's some debate over how long after 680 he's active, but we know he's at least active these long. So. In fact, could someone read for us then Isaiah 1:1? Isaiah kind of opens with the scope of his ministry. All right, so we've got, he mentions 4 kings, which again also kind of extends to being a long period of time that he's active. So the kings of Judah that are during Isaiah's active ministry, Uzziah, and we'll touch on him a little deeper. He's king from about 791 to 740 BC. Jotham, his son, they're co-regents for 11 years, and then Jotham is king for a few years and then deposed and died by 732 BC. And here we get a bit of, the other thing is also as we go through, we'll see that Isaiah's mentioning all these kings. We also get Isaiah's mentioned in other places in the Bible too, where he appears to these kings. And so we get kind of the details of these kings and their reigns, and also some bits and pieces of Isaiah's stuff. So we can see in some places where we get Isaiah's point of view in his book, and we get the Kings or Chronicles, the official political, historical point of view in other ways that way too. So 2 Kings 15, could someone read this? And I'll keep advancing as we go. All right, so again, he reigns 16 years total, but some of that's co-regency with his father. And he does what is right, but he doesn't do as much right as he could, because he doesn't remove all the high places. There's still, so he's faithful, but he's not clearing out the idols like he could have or should have. And we also then get a few different, we get some tension building too, because Syria's starting to get antsy and change things. And as we'll see, remember this is the time of the divided kingdom, and Israel has a lot of challenges. The northern kingdom has some challenges as well. All right, so Ahaz reigns for about 16 years as well, son of Jotham. And could someone read this? And so Pekah's the king of the northern kingdom at this point. Then. So, not a good king. And so kind of as we see, Isaiah deals with some, has some good kings and some bad kings during his time as a prophet. Yeah, Jeanette. Yeah. Some of it's hard to date. We're getting to the point where we'll see some more overlap, especially as other nations start getting more involved with Israel. That because then, if the Syrians are invading Israel and they talk about when they invaded Israel somewhere else, then we can take, that and what's in the Bible and put them together and see how they line up. So there's some of that, but also, of course, not everything's recorded. It all depends on what pieces of paper or what tablets or things have survived. This time.
Child sacrifice,
well, that happened certainly. I mean, they talk about the valley of. We know that some of those other idols, some of the other gods of the other cultures, that was a thing that they did. When Jesus talks about the flames of Gehenna, in this place where the fires never go out, the valley there, that's kind of where that had been happening. And happened earlier in the Old Testament when they went astray, that kind of thing. Most often, if there's any, the big archaeological records will tend to be this king signed a treaty with that king, and if we can read it in the Bible and we see the other king says, oh yeah, we signed this treaty thing, then that overlaps, or military battles, or we conquered this thing. And some of that just all depends on the empire and how important they thought Israel was, whether it was worth noting in a thing or not. And of course, then you also run into stuff like with trying to do earlier stuff is sometimes difficult. And one of the things they talk about with that, for example, the Exodus, is you kind of just assume that if the victors write the history, they're not going to write the stuff that makes them look bad. And we might touch on that too as we get through some of the Syrian invasion. There's a couple miraculous things that are recorded in the Bible that don't fit in the archaeological record. And one of the ways we explain that is, well, the Syrians aren't going to mention they lost a whole army. So Ahaz, and then Hezekiah, and we'll touch on these kings too as we go through these messianic prophecies. Which one that Isaiah is talking to as he's making these prophecies, that kind of thing. So then Hezekiah is from 715 to 686 BC, and then Manasseh is his son, although note that Isaiah didn't include him. So this is about Hezekiah. All right. So, good king, bad king, good king. And note this one does even more than Jotham. That he's not just a good king, but he destroys all the high places, all the places where the idol worship was going on. Any thoughts, questions, comments there? Although, of course, note that anything can become an idol, including the bronze serpent that is supposed to point to God's, miraculous healing. The people were worshiping that at some point, so he breaks it into pieces, and you can't worship it now; it's broken. So, all right, and then his son is Manasseh. And Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. And also note here, we're no longer getting the dates from the northern kingdom kings, because the northern kingdom's been conquered at this point. His mother's name was Hephzibah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. He rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah his father had destroyed, erected altars for Baal, and made an Asherah pole, as Ahab king of Israel had done, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. All right, so it's Asherah was another goddess of the time. Tended to be the consort of Baal, if I'm remembering right. And they talk about Asherah poles being where she was worshipped. And so. Oh yeah, I mean this is all they're all kings of David, descendants of David. This is all sons don't always right. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Children rebel against their parents. I mean, yeah. Happens in the Bible, happens in our lives too. So, yeah. All right. And then, so as we go back to Uzziah, and we'd covered this in Bible class, in one of the online Bible classes a while back anyway, but touch on it again. So Isaiah 1, he lists the stuff. Isaiah 6 is where he gives his call. And in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. So King Uzziah is, again, king of Judah from 791 to 740. It's probably the silver age. If David and Solomon, the United Kingdom, is the golden age of Israel, then this is kind of the silver age. That with Uzziah in Judah and Jeroboam in Israel, it's a time of peace and prosperity. So things are going well, at least outwardly, during Uzziah's reign. And here, Jeanette, there's a Uzziah tablet. It's dated to about 30 to 70 CE or 80, 700 years after the death of Uzziah, but it says, "Hither were brought the bones of Uzziah, king of Judah, not to be opened." So there was at least some. They found a tablet that says this was claiming to be on the bones of King Uzziah. So again, little proof that he existed. It's 700 years later, so it's not as direct as if you found stuff that was happening right around that time. But and I'm assuming you can all read that, right? Yeah. What? Oh yeah, definitely. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I can recognize that those are Hebrew letters, but it would take me a bit to get there. Again, partly because my Hebrew's rusty, but also partly because it's sort of cursive. Is not the best penmanship carved in there, and you also see the things with Hebrew is, let's see, is this what I want? There we go. That you read it right to left, but also in Hebrew, and the Hebrew I read, the Hebrew that's on my Hebrew Bible that I've got sitting in my office, has vowels under here that are not in what's written elsewhere. So, all right, and so Uzziah's reign begins. Where it's recorded in 2 Chronicles. All the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, made him father instead of his father Amaziah. He rebuilt Aloth, restored it to Judah after the king slept with his fathers. He was 16 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. Mother's name was Jehoilah of Jerusalem. Sometimes when they record the mother's name, partly it's just genealogy stuff, but also partly sometimes you can tell that it's the bad kings tend to have mothers who were not from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all his father Amaziah had done. Set himself to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. As long as he sought the Lord, God made him prosper. So, Then, of course. But when Uzziah was strong, he grew proud to his destruction. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God, entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Azariah the priest went in after him with 80 priests of the Lord who were men of valor, and they withstood King Uzziah and said to him, "It's not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Go out of the sanctuary, for you have done wrong, and it will bring you no honor from the Lord God." Uzziah was angry. He had a censer in his hand to burn incense, and when he became angry with the priests, leprosy broke out on his forehead in the presence of the priests in the house of the Lord by the altar of incense. Then Azariah the chief priest and all the priests looked at him, and behold, he was leprous in his forehead. They rushed him out quickly, and he himself hurried to go out because the Lord had struck him down. And he was a leper to the day of his death, and being a leper lived in a separate house, for he was excluded from the house of the Lord. And Jotham his son was over the king's household, governing the people of the land. So, and the year King Uzziah died kind of marks the end of a reign, but his reign is shortened a bit earlier on because he's the king. He can do whatever he wants until God reminds him that he can't do whatever he wants. And so bad things happen that way. All right. Any thoughts, questions, comments on any of this stuff thus far? Yeah, Jeanette. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They have established that these states are pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's some debate, and you run into some challenges sometimes. I mean, if nothing else, it's the fact that even if you have these different cultures who all agree that the same thing happened, they're all using different calendars. I mean, this isn't like everyone's using the, Gregorian calendar. Everyone goes, "Oh yeah, this is BC because we're still waiting for Christ, right?" But Isaiah's messianic prophecies don't quite go that far. So lining it up, one of the commentaries I was noting said that even what was it? The northern kingdom dated the king's reigns from the fall, and the southern kingdom dated king's reign, the year the king began his reign, from the spring, or something like that. I mean, so you've got even just that little stuff will throw things off. But of course, there's lots of different archaeologists, people like Dr. Meyer, very, very smart, who figure this out, try and figure out how to line things up together. And so you've got archaeologists working with the physical stuff on the outside that they discover. You've got other people working with even just the texts that you have from Isaiah, or from some of these other people, or people referring to Isaiah, and getting the dates that way. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because especially as you get, the further in the past you get, the fewer artifacts that have survived and things, and so the harder it is to sometimes make things line up, just because you don't have quite as many points of comparison or things. Whereas, as you get closer, and then there's more artifacts, there's more stuff remaining. Once you get to the point where the Romans were really good, the Romans were very good record keepers, for example. And so we get some of those things, and so then it's easier to line things up. Although even then, of course, it's sometimes a challenge. I mean, every Christmas you come up with Luke records a census that never happened, and then there's all sorts of things of, well, what was Luke talking about? What are these people assuming is the census he's talking about, and how do those line up? That kind of thing happens too. Well, yeah, I mean, it varies. Of course, the challenge is that for some of this stuff, that there's been enough ups and downs in empires and different things that some things were intentionally destroyed. I mean, that was a big challenge. For example, when ISIS was controlling parts of Iraq, I mean, they were blowing things up that didn't fit with their fundamentalist Muslim ideology. So, who knows what kind of artifacts got lost because they blew things up or destroyed things. Or the Taliban blew up Buddha statues in Afghanistan and that were thousands of years old. And those kind of things. And so, just thinking about it's amazing what we have, but also then amazing how much we could know if we hadn't lost all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Something we learned yesterday, or at least I did, in the moment they were saluting this 20th year, there was a young lady who had been a gymnast at Iowa State, and she was on one of those planes. She was on a plane heading to California to take over the head coaching gymnastics job at University of California, maybe Santa Barbara. She's on that plane with Bob.
Yeah. Yeah, see, that's just 20 years ago, and think of all this stuff we could learn and things. So, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we might touch more as we go through, too, but I mean, like, as we're looking at Isaiah, one of the amazing things is that, and Paul Myers talked about this too, but the fact that we were only able to go back 1,000 years in terms of Hebrew manuscripts, and then, I guess 70-ish years ago now, in the 40s, a shepherd boy throws a rock in and breaks, here's a pot break, and goes in and discovers this, what we know as the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the group called the Essenes was hiding out in the Dead Sea, out in the middle of nowhere, waiting for the end of the world to come, and so they hid all their stuff. And the fact that they rolled these scrolls up and sealed them in pots, and they were in a very dry area, that they all survived. And then we can look back and just see that how few changes there were from the oldest we had back to those. And there was at the time of Jesus, and there was 1,000-year gap there between the oldest manuscripts we had and what we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's also amazing and thing to remember as we go through this too. All right, so yeah, King Uzziah is stricken with leprosy, and so his reign ends poorly, and so this is the time that Isaiah is coming, and so you can kind of understand why God gives him a bunch of prophecies looking ahead to the future, looking to how God is going to save his people. Both in the immediate future, that happens a few times during the course of Isaiah, and also looking ahead to the Messiah, and how that points to Jesus, and looking even further ahead then to, of course, when Jesus comes again, and everything's fixed once and for all. So the year King Uzziah died, the year Isaiah begins his ministry is the beginning of the decline of Judah, and there's bad stuff coming for Israel. Because during the time of Isaiah's prophecies, during the time of Isaiah's active ministry, that's when the northern kingdom gets captured and taken away. Which, is a pretty strong warning for the people of Judah. All right, and of course, when Isaiah is called, he gets he sees God sitting on a throne, and then the angel gives him a coal because he says, "How can I talk? I'm a man of unclean lips. I'm among a people of unclean lips." And God says, "Well, let me clean your lips for you." So the angel grabs the coal from the altar, puts it on his mouth, and then Isaiah is able to, given the words of God to be able to speak and be a prophet. All right, so that's Uzziah. Then the other end of Isaiah's ministry, and this is where we get some of people thinking, well, Isaiah couldn't have written this all at the same time. So Isaiah 45, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, to loose the belts of kings, open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen, I call you by name. I name you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that the people may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things." So Cyrus, Persian emperor, reigns from 550 to 530 BC. Remember what were the dates we were talking about before this? 740 to 680. So Isaiah is talking about someone who reigns in 550. By name. How does this work? This is why people think there needs to be a second or third Isaiah who's writing later. Or at least one of the reasons. Because without supernatural inspiration of how would Isaiah know there's going to be this guy named Cyrus who's going to do all this stuff? Because as we go through the messianic prophecies, I mean, we get names of Jesus. We'll look at Emmanuel, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, all those kinds of things. But we don't get Cyrus. Again, and also, what's the theme throughout this stuff? I equip you, though you do not know me. No one ever accuses Cyrus of being a good follower of God. So the content of Isaiah's prophecy spans 200 years just between Uzziah and Cyrus. So his ministry is 60 years. The content is at least spanning that 200 years. And again, looking further, because he's looking further ahead to Jesus, who's, of course, right at that BC AD divide. So 700-ish years after Isaiah. And then looking ahead even further to a time that hasn't happened yet. When God comes again and restores everything in his holy mountain and everything like that. All right, any thoughts, questions, comments on that stuff? Okay. So.
Isaiah as a book of Bible.
Uh-huh. No, I mean, there's no controversy that Isaiah is a book of the Bible. Right.
But I mean, the authorship.
Not at that time, not that we know of. Yeah. No, not that we know of. What? Well, I mean, so that's it. Was Isaiah writing just more of a topical name and not not a proper name here for, for Cyrus, something like that. They'll try and explain things a little bit that way, but how well that works. There was Cyrus is the Persian emperor from 550 to 530 BC. He's the one who releases them to go back to Israel. So the fact that Isaiah is looking ahead, because Isaiah is in these times of the kings warning people shape up or bad things will happen. Then he's looking ahead also to the bad things that are happening. Are you going to get taken into exile? And then at some points, just like the northern king just happened to the northern kingdom, they just got taken into exile by the Assyrians. So you better shape up or you're going to be taken into exile as well. But then Isaiah is also looking ahead to hope of, while you're in exile, here's what you can look forward to and how you can still have hope. And looking ahead to, you will be restored from exile. God will preserve a remnant that he will use to keep on his mission, keep following his plan. All right, and so closing, we've got a few quotes that remind us of why Isaiah is so neat and interesting and exploring. So the scholar named William Lasore, Isaiah is great for two reasons. He lived in momentous days and critical days of international upheaval, and he wrote what many consider to be the greatest book in the Old Testament. So, and again, the key theme is the salvation, the deliverance of God and of the Lord. And so we'll see this happen in a couple different ways, even as we look specifically at the messianic prophecies, because they'll have some points where they're definitely looking ahead to Jesus, but there's also some points where there's a more immediate fulfillment too, where there's a promise that God will save his people, and it'll happen obviously through Jesus, but there's something more immediate happening that way as well. And then also looking further ahead to the ultimate fulfillment when Christ returns the second time. All right, so how important is Isaiah, especially looking at Jesus' messianic stuff? Located on the front of the historic Trinity Church in Boston are sculptures of 6 men. At the center are the 4 gospel writers. They're flanked by Paul and Isaiah. Isaiah's presence in this distinguished group speaks volumes about his importance for understanding the Messiah. So you've got the 4 gospel writers, you've got Paul, and then you've got Isaiah. As who do you need to have at the front of this church to have, to understand who Jesus is?
Right up there too.
Yep, right up there too. Right, we've got Moses and Isaiah, Peter and Paul. Who are the 4 guys in the Bible aside from Jesus in the middle? We need to focus on. Yeah. All right. So Jerome, Latin scholar, he's the one who assembled the Vulgate, the Latin version of the Bible. Said a similar thing. He said of Isaiah, Isaiah should be called an evangelist rather than a prophet because he describes all the mysteries of Christ and the church so clearly that you think he's composing a history of what has already happened rather than prophesying about what is to come. And of course, so as we go through again, we'll see how some of this, some of the prophecies are kind of vague, but some are pretty specific too. And you're like, well, there's no way this could have happened without, inspiration stuff. Augustine, of course, later, he's important to us because, there's the order of monks that Luther joined were Augustinians, following the teachings of Augustine. And Augustine asked Ambrose, who was Bishop of Milan, Italy, and was kind of Augustine's mentor. Ambrose was basically, he wasn't quite the first Christian that Augustine met who he didn't think was a complete idiot, but it was close. That Augustine thought was, this super smart intellectual who thought all the Christians were dumb, and then he hears Ambrose talking, and teaching and things, and goes, well, that actually kind of makes sense. Maybe there's something to this, and of course, Holy Spirit works on Augustine a lot more too, along with his mother's prayers, because he'd gone astray, but his mom kept praying for him for decades, and now he's a saint. But so asked for advice on what he should read. Ambrose suggested Isaiah. because I believe he's more plainly a foreteller of the gospel and the calling of the Gentiles than are the others. So if you're going to start with an Old Testament book, read Isaiah, because it points to Christ more clearly than the rest of it. So. All right, so the book of Isaiah composes a beautiful portrait of Israel's messianic hope of the Savior of the world, Jesus. All right, do I have? Oh, right. Now this is kind of hard to see, but it's from the infographic Bible? Someone took a Bible and did a lot of the same kind of data visualization stuff that happens with other polls and stuff, and so they took all the prophecies from the Old Testament and connected them to where they are in the New Testament. This section is Isaiah. So note it's kind of the biggest chunk of the Old Testament. The next biggest one is Psalms. And then, obviously kind of hard to follow, but if you follow the curved lines, you get a bunch of spots in the Gospels, spots in Paul's letters, and even some spots in Revelation. Looking ahead to what we're doing. So, all right. Any questions, comments, concerns? All right. So we're just about, it's 10:30, so we got a little bit of time if we want to. Otherwise, we can wrap up here too as well. Yeah.
Well, we took Dr. Mark all the way to 5 till last time. You were ready.
Right. Well, I got to go get some breakfast pizza. So. All right. So next week, next week, of course, now we just started the series, and next week we're going to skip. Next week I'm filling in over in State Center, and so. But Judy had agreed to talk about stuff. She's going around doing a bunch of LWML presentations and things, so I think it'll be something on that. But we'll see what she does for that, and then. So that in 2 weeks we'll get back. I think the first messianic prophecy we'll look at is the Isaiah 7 virgins shall conceive bit, pointing ahead to Jesus there as well. All right. Well, why don't we, as a closing, we'll just speak it. I won't make you sing it because it's a kind of funky tune. But the Isaiah mighty seer. Isaiah, mighty seer in days of old, the Lord of all in spirit did behold, high on a lofty throne, in splendor bright, with robes that filled the temple courts with light. Above the throne were flaming seraphim, 6 wings had they, these messengers of him. With 2 they veiled their faces as was right, with 2 they humbly hid their feet from sight. And with the other 2 aloft they soared, one to the other called and praised the Lord. Holy is God, the Lord of Sabaoth. Holy is God, the Lord of Sabaoth. Holy is God, the Lord of Sabaoth. His glory fills the heavens and the earth. The beams and lintels trembled at the cry, and clouds of smoke enwrapped the throne on high. All righty. Thank you very much.